The winter of 1949 came early to Ellison Creek. Snow fell for weeks without stopping, coating every roof, every road, every sign of life in a still, white silence. The kind of cold that didn't just freeze the air, it slowed the heart. People stayed inside, shutters closed, stoves burning. Only one house at the far edge of town stayed dark. The old Ellison farmhouse. Its chimney never smoked, its curtains never moved. Neighbors said it had always felt wrong somehow, like the land itself didn't want to hold it anymore. When the sheriff's car pulled up that morning, the snow was waist deep. He said later that even the wind seemed afraid to blow near that house. The front door was unlocked, but swollen from the cold, and it took both men to push it open. Inside, everything was quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock that had long since stopped keeping time. The kitchen smelled of metal and milk, gone sour. Then they saw her, Marjorie Ellison, 17 years old, sitting at the table with her hands folded like she was waiting for grace. Her hair was tangled, her lips cracked from cold, and her eyes looked right through them. In the corner sat her brother Peter, 15, barefoot, his clothes soaked in something dark. He didn't look up, not even when they called his name. On the table between them was a small bundle wrapped in newspaper and tied with twine. The sheriff thought it was a doll. Then he heard it breathe, a newborn, pale as snow, its tiny chest rising beneath the inked pages. No one spoke for a long time. When they finally did, their voices came out in whispers, as if they were in a church and something sacred or cursed was watching. The papers later called it the family shame. Headlines printed in bold ink, bleeding into every breakfast table from Chicago to St. Louis. A brother, a sister, a child born in sin. But Ellison Creek had its own name for it. They said the curse had always been there, that the land was poisoned before the house was ever built. Some remembered Marjorie and Peter's father, a preacher who claimed he could talk to angels, though most said they sounded more like screams. Others remembered the night he vanished, leaving only a Bible open to the words, "And the sins of the father shall visit the children." After that winter, no one went near the farmhouse. The well froze solid, the fields grew wild, and the road leading there vanished beneath years of frost and weeds. The town stopped saying the Ellison name. They sealed their records, tore the family's photographs from church walls, and prayed the story would fade with time. But old places have long memories, and on the coldest nights, when the snow drifts thick across the fields, some swear they still see candlelight flicker through the empty windows, like someone inside is waiting, or worse, still praying for forgiveness that never came. When the Ellison farmhouse was searched again weeks after the arrests, the air inside felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The investigators came not for answers, but for closure. Yet every step on those rotting floorboards seemed to pull them deeper into something that didn't want to be found. Dust hung like mist. The wallpaper peeled in long curling strips, revealing layers of faded paint beneath, each one a whisper of the years spent there. And in Marjorie's room, behind a cracked mirror and a loose panel of wood, they found it. A small leather diary, stitched by hand, the pages warped from damp. The first entry was dated a year before the baby's birth. The handwriting was careful, delicate. She wrote about the snow, about Peter carving names into the frost, about their father's rules. No friends, no music, no leaving the property after dusk. Each day ended with what she called the prayers. They were told to kneel in the parlor, heads bowed, until their father said they could stand. But some nights, the prayers lasted until morning, and when the fire died, she wrote, something else would speak through him, something that called itself the true father. At first, the investigators thought she was describing delusion, the mind of a girl breaking under control. But as the pages turned, her words changed. The tone grew colder, the writing sharper. She began recording dreams that felt too vivid to be dreams at all. She wrote of footsteps in the attic, of voices reciting verses backward, of a shadow that moved even when no light was near. The shadow, she said, never left the house. It just changed who it followed. Father says it chose me, she wrote in one trembling line. But Peter hears it now too. He says it comes for him when the candles die. The diary blurred truth and nightmare until they were indistinguishable. Dates skipped, seasons looped, as if time inside the house had folded in on itself. One entry described her mother waking at dawn, eyes open but not breathing, a crucifix pressed into her palm so tightly it left wounds. Another told of Peter standing by the window, whispering a hymn no one had taught him. She wrote that he smiled in his sleep, that he said the voice promised to make them whole again. When the psychiatrists reviewed the diary decades later, they called it trauma dissociation, a mind splintering under fear. But the detectives who handled those pages said the air in the room grew colder as they read, that the words seemed to breathe. The final page held a single line, smudged with what looked like water or tears. Peter says the voice comes for him now. After that, the diary ended. But those who've seen it say sometimes, when the light hits just right, faint words appear in the margin, letters that weren't there before, as if Marjorie never stopped writing, as if the house kept her story alive long after the ink had dried. In the spring of 1972, long after the Ellison case had been buried beneath snow and silence, a state fire inspector named Daniel Hurst was assigned to clear old evidence from the county archive. Most of it was dust and rot, charred folders, half-melted negatives, forgotten relics of crimes no one remembered. But in the back of a metal drawer, wrapped in brown paper, he found something unmarked, a small reel-to-reel tape, its label peeled away by time. There was no record of it in the case files. Curious, he threaded it through an old player in the office basement, pressed play, and listened. The hiss came first, a long, steady breath of static. Then, a woman's voice, thin and trembling. She introduced herself as Marjorie Ellison. The year, she said, was 1949. The tape was an interview, one of many conducted after her arrest by a state psychiatrist named Dr. Miller. Her words were soft, careful, as though she feared they might be overheard even then. She spoke of her father's sermons that took place after midnight, when the candles burned low and the walls began to hum. She said he taught that blood was sacred, that it carried the mark of the chosen, and that sin could only be cleansed by returning it to the source. For minutes at a time, there was silence on the tape, followed by the faint sound of breathing. Two people, not one. Dr. Miller asked her what she meant by visitors. Marjorie's voice changed. She said they came from the attic, that they were neither angels nor ghosts, but something that wanted to wear their names. She said the voice her father heard was the same one Peter began hearing after the funeral. It comes through walls, she whispered. Through blood. It listens. Halfway through the recording, Daniel noticed something strange. A second voice began to overlap Marjorie's, not Dr. Miller's, but a boy's. The tone was soft, but the words were clear. I told her not to speak, it said. She promised she wouldn't. The inspector stopped the reel, thinking it was damaged, then rewound it. But no matter where he started, the same thing happened. Two voices speaking across time, answering one another like a conversation that shouldn't have been possible. When the tape was analyzed, experts confirmed what he already feared. The male voice belonged to Peter Ellison. His section of the recording had been captured weeks after Marjorie's on a completely separate reel. Yet both voices shared the same pauses, the same inflections, even moments where they laughed together. The frequencies aligned as if they had been recorded in the same room, seconds apart. Some said it was a trick of the machine, old audio bleeding between layers of tape. Others called it evidence of a shared psychosis, twins of the mind bound by something no one could measure. But those who listened closely claimed to hear something deeper beneath the words, a low vibration, almost like chanting, growing stronger near the end. The final seconds cut abruptly, a single whisper escaping before the silence swallowed it whole. The house remembers. They said the baby was taken away before dawn, wrapped in hospital linen, her cries fading as the snow swallowed the sound. The state gave her no name, only a number. For the officials, she was a case to be managed, not a life to be tended. Files marked Ellison infant were stamped and shelved, and the town exhaled in relief. The papers stopped printing stories, the church locked its doors for a week, and people went on pretending Ellison Creek was still a normal place. But time, as it often does in cursed places, didn't heal anything. It just learned to hide. By the time the child was old enough to walk, her trail was already lost in bureaucracy. Foster homes listed and delisted, caretakers changing without reason, records blurred. In the 1960 census, a name appears, Margaret Ellison Jr., no birth certificate, no family of record. Her photo shows a girl with dark hair, grey eyes, and a faint, almost familiar smile. The kind of face you could forget and yet somehow keep seeing in dreams. Her file ends in 1961. The note reads simply, "Run away, presumed relocated." But there were whispers even then, from a nearby foster home. One worker said she woke to find Margaret standing at the edge of her bed, whispering scripture in a voice too low for a child. Another said the girl refused to sleep in rooms with mirrors, claiming she saw a family that wasn't dead staring back at her. When she vanished at age 12, no one searched for long. The state was eager to close the file. The Ellison name still made people nervous. Decades passed before anyone looked again. In the 1980s, a journalist named Harriet Cole reopened the cold case while writing about missing children. She dug through archives and found something the records had tried to erase: DNA fragments from unidentified remains found near Ellison Creek's old cemetery. The samples matched the Ellison bloodline, but the lab report noted something strange. The genetic markers repeated, as if parent and child were the same person. Harriet never published the findings. She quit her job a month later, citing personal reasons, and disappeared not long after. Locals have their own version. They speak of a girl seen wandering the fields in spring fog, barefoot, her eyes the same shade as both her parents. Some say she's grown, though her face never seems to age. Others say she waits near the cemetery fence, tracing the brass tags of unmarked graves with her fingers, humming a tune no one recognizes. Those who've seen her claim she vanishes when approached, leaving only a faint warmth in the air, like breath on glass. The town doesn't speak her name anymore. They just call her the Child of the Creek. But those who know the story, those who've seen the records and heard the recordings, understand something simpler and far worse. The baby that was taken away never left. She's still looking for the family that built her, from the blood that refused to die. In 1996, nearly half a century after the Ellison scandal, the town had almost forgotten. The farmhouse was long gone, its remains buried under grass and silence. But memories have a way of surviving, like bones under soil, waiting for someone curious or foolish enough to dig. That someone was Deputy Charles Wynne, 81 years old and dying. He had been a young man in 1949, the last to leave the Ellison property before it was condemned. When reporters found him in a nursing home, he said he didn't want to die with the truth in his hands. Then he reached under his pillow and pulled out a yellowed envelope sealed with tape. Inside were photographs. 12 in total, black and white, their edges curled with time. The first few showed the farmhouse basement, bare stone walls, a dirt floor, and a wooden cross lying face down in the corner. On the ground were chalk circles drawn in careful ritual precision, their lines smeared as if stepped through in haste. Dozens of melted candles surrounded a single object, a Bible torn apart, pages scattered, most of them from the book of Genesis. A few had been pinned to the beams overhead, nailed there with rusted spikes. In one, the ink had bled into the wood, leaving behind faint words, and the flesh became one. Then came the fifth photograph. the one that stopped the room cold. It showed Peter Ellison, unmistakably him, standing in the corner of that same basement. His pupils were wide, his mouth half open, as if mid-breath. In his hands, he held what appeared to be an infant's blanket. The fabric was dark, wet in places, and just visible near the edge of the frame was what looked like a small footprint in the dirt. The investigators who viewed the images said the composition was too perfect to be accidental, angled, focused, framed as though someone wanted to document something sacred, or proof of it. Experts confirmed the negatives were authentic. No forgery, no tampering. But the most disturbing part wasn't what was in the photos. It was when they were taken. Each print bore a timestamp dated 2 days after Peter and Marjorie were taken into custody. The basement should have been empty, sealed by police order. No one was authorized to enter. Yet someone had been there. Someone with a camera and time to arrange candles, to hang scripture, to pose a boy who should have been miles away in a detention ward. When asked about it, the old deputy's eyes filled with tears. He said the night after the arrests, he heard singing coming from the direction of the Ellison property, soft, broken, childlike. He swore he saw a flicker of light through the trees, the shape of a person carrying something in their arms. When he returned 2 days later, the light was gone. Only the smell of wax and wet soil remained. The sheriff at the time had ordered the photos buried, sealed into evidence no one would ever request. Wynne obeyed, but he kept one copy hidden all these years. The last image showed only the cellar steps leading upward. The door opened just enough to let in light. A shadow stood at the top, indistinct but watching. "They said we took the children away," Wynne whispered. "But maybe the house took them back." In 2019, the Ellison case surfaced again. Not through curiosity, but through procedure. Forensic researchers in Chicago were digitizing old DNA archives for national standardization, hundreds of sealed envelopes from forgotten crimes. One of them was marked simply Ellison 1949. It had been sealed for 70 years. Inside were 3 small vials, samples collected from Marjorie, from Peter, and from the newborn. None of the analysts knew the story behind them. They were just data to be logged and converted. But when the machine finished processing, something strange appeared on the screen. All 3 profiles were identical. Not similar, identical, down to every mitochondrial strand. It wasn't genetic overlap. It was replication. At first, they thought it was contamination. The old samples were fragile, stored in wax-sealed tubes and paper envelopes. But when they reran the tests, the same result appeared. 3 lives sharing one code, one origin. The lab director ordered a third analysis under sterile conditions. Again, identical, statistically impossible. The software flagged it as a potential error, but the analysts couldn't ignore the readings. It was as though they weren't looking at separate people at all, but the same body, copied through time. One technician, curious, dug deeper into the record and found something buried in the metadata, a faint secondary marker in the infant's sample, a signature that didn't belong to any known human pattern. When enhanced, it formed a looped sequence, self-replicating, a closed circle, repeating endlessly. The technician said it looked almost deliberate, like a message written into blood. He resigned 2 days later and never returned to the lab. When the discovery leaked, journalists swarmed Ellison Creek again. The town, once invisible, became infamous overnight. The locals gave the story a new name, the family that bred itself. They said it proved what the old ones had whispered, that the Ellisons had been trying to create purity, to erase difference, to fold generations back into one body. Some called it science, others called it sin perfected. But the researchers who handled the data said something else, that when they opened the digital file, the image of the DNA strands on their monitors kept shifting, even when disconnected from the server, as if the code were alive, rewriting itself. The Ellison farm no longer exists. The land was sold, paved, and turned into a quiet field between highways. But every spring before the frost has fully lifted, wildflowers bloom there weeks ahead of the season. Crimson petals trace the outline of where the farmhouse once stood. Locals say the soil is warmer there, even at night, and that if you stand still long enough, you can hear a faint hum beneath your feet, a heartbeat buried under earth. Some scientists still try to explain it. Others refuse to touch the files, but people who live nearby know better. They've seen the flowers, the way their stems twist toward each other, the way they seem to grow in patterns too precise to be random, and sometimes, when a storm rolls in, the ground runs red as if the rain itself remembers. They say the Ellison blood never truly ended. It just found new ways to keep itself alive.